Well, good evening, everybody, and thanks for coming to the, wow, it's kind of hard to see up here. Distinguished Artist Lecture with Holly Andres. Holly was born in Missoula and grew up the youngest of 10 siblings on the edge of town. She was here this morning talking to some of us that work here and a couple reporters, and kind of sounded like some sort of no rules kid paradise on the Clark Fork River there with in the late 70s and early 80s. You can see some of that nostalgia in her photos in the exhibit here. She got her BFA at the University of Montana in 2002 and her MFA at Portland State in 2004. So when Holly agreed to do this exhibition, we knew this would be a really great opportunity to focus on the artist and support an artist, which is what we try to do throughout the exhibition year. And so we put in for a grant, and we received a matching grant from the Pleiades Foundation to purchase two works of art, well, to purchase art from the exhibition. It turned out that we bought two pieces, and also to commission a work from Holly. So we asked her if she was interested in coming to Missoula for a week-long residency and working to produce an image or a series of images while she was here, and of course she jumped on it. It was also a perfect opportunity to partner with the University of Montana, as Holly is an alum. So I wanted to thank Elizabeth Dove, who worked on behalf of the School of Art, to bring Holly in and schedule the visiting artist stuff for the week. And this lecture is sponsored by the Jim and Jane Dew Foundation, Jim and Jane Dew Visiting Artists Lecture. So that's what's supporting us tonight. The presentation is also being recorded by the Missoula Community Access Television as part of a media assistance grant that MCAT gave to us to do that. So I'm just going to turn it over to Holly. She has a great presentation here, and she speaks really succinctly and clearly about her work. Really glad to have her. We did do a show with Holly in 2008. Stories from a Short Street. It was her first kind of series of art in this photos in this narrative realm. There are 3 of them in the lobby that we collected out of that show. So that kind of went along with writing the grant to Pleiades to add work in our collection from Holly, so we could create a small body of work that we could potentially travel around the state. We also have a couple of films. So we're just really glad to have these works by Holly in our collection. Oh, and I should tell you tonight, so actually just before you guys showed up, we did the Collector's Circle event, which we do annually, where the money from that membership goes into a pool, and that was the match to purchase work. And the group selected the red purse, the large photo back by the door. And one of the small works from the new series, the Fallen Fawn series, up by the door. It's the interior of the car with the cigarette smoke and the red fingernails. So super glad to have those in our collection along with the others. And now I will turn it over to Holly.
Okay. Thank you so much for coming tonight. The honor of having been invited to come home to the Missoula Art Museum for this exhibition of such an expansive collection of my work is an incredibly proud moment. The collaboration process with John, who worked on curating the exhibition, has probably been one of the most, one of the highlights of my artistic career. As an artist in residence, I have a week that is jam-packed with various endeavors at the university through the art department, and as John mentioned, it'll culminate with a photo shoot on Sunday, May 8th, which is going to kick off my latest series. And of course, various professors at in the art department have been just so instrumental, and I want to thank everybody who's affiliated with the museum who has made this such a brilliant success. Again, thanks to the art department, the Jane Dew Visiting Artist Lecture Fund, the Contemporary Collectors Circle, and the Pleiades Foundation. Oh, okay, so I have two things happening here. And that is, okay. So this is a very unique lecture for me. Not only was I born and raised in Missoula and was a student at the University of Montana, and of course the fact that there's so many familiar and old faces in the crowd, but it was precisely my experience growing up in Missoula that has been the primary source of inspiration for the work selected for this exhibition. So the work in this show consists of several series that I'm going to talk about tonight. The Stories from a Short Street, Sparrow Lane, The Fall of Spring Hill, Summer of the Hornets, and my latest series, The Fallen Fawn. As some of you maybe no doubt recall, this is the Andres house. It's still perched at the end of Short Street near the Clark Fork River in the Orchard Homes area. And it is the house where my family lived for 35 years. This is the house where my parents raised 10 children, as well as countless 4-H cows, pigs, sheep, chickens, ducks, cats, dogs, yes, inside the house at times. And we also had a litter box trained ferret named Ferris. So now at 38 years old, I have lived away from this house almost exactly as long as I lived in it. But yet, it remains to be the setting for many of my dreams. And my recollection of poignant moments that occurred within these walls remain as vivid as ever. And so I have become captivated by this response. As an artist, I have used photography to examine the complexities of childhood, the fleeting and subjective nature of memory, and personal narrative as a form of feminist expression. And these are my siblings. Sean, Tom, Becky, Shelley, Jerry, Jesse, Julie, Nate, Nikki, and Holly. And I think I'm pretty easy to pick out. So Stories from a Short Street was the first body of work I did after completing my MFA, and was ultimately inspired by this unique experience of growing up the youngest of 10 children. For the series, I created a fictitious group of siblings that are loosely based on the archetypes of my own family. Each one of the images was constructed to recreate a specific moment and to depict a psychological portrait. I'm going to choose to just address the premise of this particular photo, since it was the first image in this series that I created, and it ultimately inspired the whole project. And it was influenced by an experience I had with hypnosis. Has anyone here ever been hypnotized before? Okay, so I was, for years, probably 10 or 15 years, I struggled with paralyzing anxiety when it came to traveling. And I was gearing up for a trip to Boston for the holidays, and I was just putting myself through all sorts of anticipatory anxiety. So as a potential quick fix, I went to a hypnotherapist. And as he was walking me through this relaxation phase, to get me into the hypnosis state, he asked me when I first experienced this anxiety. And with crystal clarity, I recalled this incident where my older sister was giving me a home perm and she discovered lice in my hair. How many of you have ever had lice or have known someone who's had lice? So it's pretty common, right? Well, incredibly, it was the first time that anyone in my family had ever had lice, and let me tell you, we were not exactly the pillar of personal hygiene. So when my sister found this bug, like total pandemonia, bursted out, and she jumped on the chair, and my mom, who was a nurse, captured it in a salad dressing jar. She didn't know what it was, and she put it in her purse and drove to a drugstore. Meanwhile, I was quarantined in the bathroom while my family boiled all of our combs and barrettes and brushes. And I remember feeling, obviously deeply ostracized and ashamed. And when my mom came home, she got the medicated shampoo and she individually washed all of our hair in the bathtub. But while I was hypnotized, I thought I was there. I was this little girl, and I could feel my little fingers on the tablecloth, and I could feel the light shining on my face, and I could smell the mixture of the perm solution with the potatoes and gravy. And I thought to myself, this would be an interesting moment to recreate in a photograph. And so I did. So my early foundation in painting and drawing informs my photographic work, and my aesthetic has definitely been influenced by my Catholic upbringing and exposure to religious iconography. So here you can see a clear reference to the Last Supper. While here, a litter of kittens, oops, I keep forgetting about that. While here, a litter of kittens in the barn becomes the nativity. As with all of the images from this series, adult authority kind of remains conspicuously off camera. And John is right. Growing up in my family, it was kind of like the lawless land. There was a cul-de-sac that had, it was a very rural area, and in the late 70s or early 80s, a cul-de-sac of duplexes arrived, and with it came a whole bunch of families, and our house was kind of the place where everybody played. But one of the things I remember is that there were really no restrictions about when we went to bed, or and I was the only person in my family that actually got to go to afternoon kindergarten. And I remember my mom would say, "I've just never seen anything like it. I've never met a 5-year-old who stays up until midnight and sleeps until noon." So anyway, I was kind of thinking of that and how I used to spend a lot of nights up very late, and but I wanted to make a photograph that was a portrait of one of my brothers. So here we see his larger than life masculine shadow projected over a superimposed Old West painting. He's wearing patriotic long johns, and there's a deer head. Hunting and taxidermy was and continues to be a big pastime in my family, and the deer is the only direct gaze with the viewer and almost seems to be whispering secrets in his ear. And so in this image I was attempting to convey some of the themes and traits and values that were encouraged in my brothers. But with every image, there's something unresolved, and my hope was to create a tension between the past, the present, and the future moment. As a related anecdote, when I was 6 years old, this fresh spring haircut spurred a story that changed my life forever. After a number of incidents where Strangers mistook me for a boy. My older teenage siblings concocted a tale that I had in fact been born a boy. And in order to maintain an even number of girls and boys in our family, my parents had me castrated at birth. And just in case I ever wanted to change back, my penis had been preserved in the freezer in the garage. So this was complicated by the fact that my dad was a sausage maker, and so as you can imagine, I was completely terrified by the possibility that my infant penis might make its way to the dinner table. And but I also seemed to understand at a very young age how integral to my identity being female was. And so my response, it seems, was to fashion myself into the girliest girl I could imagine. And I sincerely lived with this confusion about my gender until I was almost a teenager. And I believe this experience has influenced the way I tend to examine gender and sexuality in my own work. And so I spent much of my youth admiring my older sisters. I had 4 of them, and I would spend time watching them go through these very extensive beauty rituals, and it seemed to be a really important part of my education in becoming a woman. This portrait is about that process. I used repetitive mirrors as a symbol for narcissism and self-reflection, as this image suggests that point in a young girl's life when they start to see themselves through other people's eyes and often develop an unhealthy preoccupation with their appearance. I'm interested in the notion of spectatorship, or simply put, the act of looking, and the power dynamic between the spectator, the artist, the viewer, the consumer, and the spectacle, the subject. And I try to seek ways to implicate the viewer without relying on a direct gaze. Okay, so Sparrow Lane was in part inspired by a conversation I had with my young friend Fiona, who's the lovely red-haired girl in the Sparrow Lane series. And she was telling me with so much enthusiasm that she was reading the Nancy Drew books. And it was really delightful to reminisce with her because I too had read Nancy Drew as a young girl. And although I couldn't remember all of the narratives of the story, the images from the cover were deeply nestled in my mind. So studying the covers, you can see a melodrama in the body language of the characters, the way their hands frame the scene, the separation of the fingers, the startling but lovely expressions on their faces. And I opted to emulate this aesthetic and intentionally pose my subjects in a very hyper-mannered way. Nancy Drew was first introduced in the 1930s by Carolyn Keene and has continued to be one of the few smart, curious, and empowering role models for young girls. Feminist literary critics have analyzed her as either a mythic hero or as an embodiment of contradictory ideas about femininity. She is simultaneously a girl power icon while still being docile, demure, and fearful. And this inherent dichotomy influenced this work. So the Sparrow Lane series is ultimately about adolescent girls who are on the cusp of acquiring forbidden knowledge, which is a metaphor for that precarious transition from girl to woman. I'm interested in that space that lies in between, when a female starts to simultaneously feel vulnerable and empowered as she transitions into womanhood. As you will see, my protagonists are empowered by their discoveries, but there's also an essence of an impending threat. I'm interested in addressing these themes in an implicit versus explicit way. The girls are potentially embarking on danger, but ultimately the work is void of explicit violence or sexuality. They're very innocent. Rather, it's that potential of losing that innocence that most interests me. My photo process has been informed and influenced by various classic films, such as Alfred Hitchcock's work, for example, the highly theatrical lighting, the rich color combinations, and the formal compositions. He was also a master at creating visual clues to communicate narratives without relying on dialogue. As a woman, of course, I find myself both compelled and concerned by Hitchcock's peculiar relationship with women. On one hand, for the time period, he was unusually writing in leading ladies as the protagonists in his films. They were far more dimensional than most at that time. They all seemed to possess powers and elements of often had secrets and were faced with making difficult decisions. But on the other hand, through his apparent sadism, they always paid for it in the end with their blonde hair and fair flesh. Some of the most informative films I recall as a child were horror films that portrayed complex female characters. Often they are the subjects of brutal betrayal, but ultimately their strengths are reasserted by the film's end. Certainly the historical context in which these films were made, in particular the advancements and the subsequent threat of 1970s feminism, contributed to the conflicted message these films made about female identity. This tension, as well as just the sheer visual aesthetic, influenced my process while working on Sparrow Lane. I also consider the work of mid-century surrealists, female surrealists, as influential. In particular, their interest in psychoanalysis and the way they metaphorically depicted fears, desires, and impulses. So throughout the series, familiar iconography such as mirrors, bird cages, chrome flashlights, spilt milk, secret passageways, skeleton keys, and hidden objects were used to suggest psychosexual metaphors. I was interested in suspending any overt clues from the viewer so that they're encouraged to arrive at their own assumptions about what they think the work is communicating. Ultimately, my hope was to present an elliptical narrative, a mystery, to encourage viewers, like the characters in the images, to strive and solve along the way. Of course, at the most rudimentary level, photography is about capturing light. And not only do I employ light as a formal device to emphasize the characters, but also as a content carrier. The illumination of light in and of itself is a revelation. And this photograph has a new home. The photos weren't all shot in the same room or house or even neighborhood, though I wanted to imply that the girls were sleuthing the grounds of a fictitious estate. My hope being to unify the narrative and situate the viewer in the setting. Also my titles, through my titles I'm referencing some of the conventions of mystery novels and their rather literal and idyllic names that I read as a young girl. I tried to be very conscientious about the spaces that my characters exist within, and instead of finding a house to shoot in, although that would be really nice, I did a lot of the art direction and completely transformed the existing space, usually my own home, to look like the vision in my mind. So they really can be thought of as installations that I might spend several weeks working on and then activated with the characters and documented photographically. So for example, I really wanted to employ complementary colors in this image, but I was having a really hard time finding the right garish wallpaper. And so I designed it on my computer and printed it out on 8.5 by 11 sheets of paper, and then hung it on my wall to make the photograph. Even though this space outside, even though this is a space outside, it also has, can be seen as a set as well, and retains that level of artifice that I'm employing. So again, through the use of complementary colors, taxidermy birds, and cinematic lighting. The pre-production is a really big part of my conceptual process. I engage in a lot of thrift shopping. Oftentimes I'll find an object that piques my curiosity, and then I can craft a narrative around it. So for example, I went to this craft fair near my house in Portland, and I found this pair of mittens, and they were homemade, and they were so stiff you couldn't really get your hand in them. They're almost like a symbol of a mitten, but I purchased them really with the intent of crafting a narrative around them. Though Sparrow Lane was shot on a large format 4x5 camera, I've never perceived the camera as an agent of truth. Again, with my background in painting and drawing, have always thought of the camera as a tool to really create an image or an essence of a moment that's in my mind's eye. So in this work, I've concocted a set of twins with just one girl. I was able to achieve this by photographing her twice in different locations with different clothing, and then compositing the two images in the final scene. Likewise, and like most people, I find identical twins to be compelling and mysterious, and I wanted to explore the idea of them as counterparts, equivalents, or accomplices embarking on these discoveries together. Birds are a reoccurring motif, hence the title. And they are the antagonists to the young protagonist, as they are historically a symbol of the masculine phallus. So here, two birds already seen lingering at the scene of the red mitten, roost triumphantly on the tipped, disheveled chair, highly suggestive of the fallen woman. Its upholstery torn, its skirt disheveled, representing the loss of girlhood and innocence. The premise of The Fall of Spring Hill was derived from a distant but poignant early childhood memory. Through a suite of 13 photographs, it illustrates an incident from a summer church camp in which a child injured himself by falling from a dilapidated wooden play structure, and the mother's fierce reaction to deconstruct it in retribution. The series is sequenced in such a way to imply parallel action between the mothers in the church kitchen preparing the food and the children playing in the field outside. Starting with this foreboding, almost horror film-like knife, which also functions much like the sharp motion of a slate, which might call to action the scene of a film. This otherwise everyday chore foreshadows brutal vengeance. The catalyst for the fall is seen here as a young boy tenderly passes a caterpillar to another child. Prior to embarking on the shoot, I honestly didn't know how I was going to illustrate how or why the boy fell. But while I was getting my camera ready and setting up, the kids were climbing on the structure. And at one moment, I looked up and I noticed Nolan, the little boy at the top, had captured a caterpillar. And the sun was backlighting him like this beautiful halo. And all the other kids were circling around. And they were waiting, hoping for a turn to experience the sensation of this caterpillar on the palm of their hands. And it was just so beautiful. And I instantly knew that that was the shot, but of course I wasn't ready, and so my challenge was to figure out how to recreate this fleeting moment. Rather than actually illustrating the fall, meanwhile in the kitchen, a cup of coffee shatters on the kitchen floor and is meant to symbolize that moment. Again, rather than explicitly showing the injured child in the wounded laying in the grass, I chose to emphasize the other children's expressions as they witnessed the fallen boy. Again, using off-camera action, my hope is to create more of an interactive experience for the viewer by propelling them to imagine their own subjective depictions of the injured boy. So as I recall, an older boy carried the injured child down the hill into the church, the rest of us trailing behind as the mothers were preparing lunch in the kitchen. To symbolize the injured boy, a still life photograph containing a spread such as deviled eggs and other finger foods surrounds a punch bowl of super saturated red punch, intended to read as danger, wound, or blood. It also represents the moment when the mothers abandon their maternal and domestic duties and take action. And the mothers responded quite fiercely. So in their polyester pantsuits and summer dresses, they wielded axes, baseball bats, and sledgehammers to deconstruct the play structure for it having harmed a child. So throughout my entire life, it seems, powerful images from this sunny afternoon have drifted in and out of my mind. My mother has since passed away, and no one can really corroborate whether this incident occurred the way that I remember it, or if it even occurred at all. To some extent, though, it doesn't really matter. For me, simply, the possibility of such a heroic occurrence was enough of a, had enough significance for me to try to revisit and reveal and enshrine through my photography. So as I mentioned before, I collect a lot of things. I do a lot of thrift shopping. I'm always dragging things home from the side of the road, and it really is a big part of my conceptual process. In fact, when I'm feeling a little bit uninspired, I will literally go to a thrift store, and it's something that I like to do alone. I usually wear earplugs so that I'm less distracted and more perceptive to ideas, and I'll just kind of float through the store just touching things and trying to be open to ideas. And I love to go to estate sales. I find it very exhilarating to pilfer through the drawers and closets of people who have inhabited these spaces, often for several decades. I like to imagine what their lives were like, and I always hope to discover some sort of a secret treasure of theirs that I can take with me. So about a year and a half ago, I happened upon a very special estate sale. And it was just like walking into this immaculately art-directed set, and I instantly knew that I wanted to photograph there. I would later learn that the woman who lived there was 100 years old when she died. So with a little bit of sleuthing and the help of my sister, who's a real estate agent, I was able to track down the new owner of the home who granted me permission to rent it for a week. My small crew and I moved in, and we spent a few days cleaning and propping out the house because all of the things were gone. And then we spent 3 days shooting the interior images for my most recent series, and the fruits of our labor I will share with you now. The Summer of the Hornets illustrates a story of two young sisters allured by a hornet's nest in the woods behind their house and the traumatic consequences of this discovery. As with most of my work, the premise of this series is loosely based on a real-life account in which my sister was horribly attacked when a hornet's nest was disrupted. Frozen with fear, she was stung over 100 times. My sister, who survived the attack, now a mother of her own 2 daughters, and her husband are actually portrayed as the family in this series. So often my work involves, as you have seen by now I'm sure, a tension between an apparently approachable subject matter and a darker, sometimes disturbing subtext. I'm interested in that cognitive dissonance that can result by employing formal elements such as bright colors, decorative patterns, theatrical lighting, and characters that reflect stereotypes of innocence, girlish femininity, and motherhood to address unsettling themes. I've been increasingly trying to challenge myself by trying to retain the narrative quality of my work without relying on human subjects. So I've been trying to create more still life images in my series, and I'm finding that often there's a presence in that absence. So the catalyst for this last series is based on a story told to me by my 2 older sisters, Becky and Shelley. And as adolescent girls, they discovered a woman's lost or abandoned suitcase near the Clark Fork River behind our house. Knowing it was a valuable treasure, they took it home, they hid it under their bed, and when they could, often during the night, they secretly dressed up in the mystery woman's belongings. They dressed up in her clothes, wrapped their hair in her curlers, and wore her lipstick. While they shared this memory with me, a few years ago, we found ourselves asking, who was that woman? Like, why was that suitcase down at the river? And why did it not occur to them to, turn it into an adult? So long after our conversation, I found myself still thinking about this woman and the possibility that my sisters, then just two curious and naive girls, could have unearthed a treasure trove containing a sinister secret. The story has all the narrative motifs that most interest me, and so I set out to make this series inspired by it. The Fallen Fawn is also sequenced to illustrate two parallel narratives: the sister discovering the suitcase and the subsequent consequences of harboring the secret, and then the implicit tale of the woman dubbed the Fallen Fawn, which is revealed through her deserted belongings left to be discovered in the woods. So now that I've contextualized the series, I'm going to let you experience it in its entirety without speaking at all about the individual images. Of course, I'll entertain whatever questions you have at the end. Thank you for being such a captivating audience. Do you have any questions? Yeah.
I'm curious about the serial quality of your images. That would probably most media suggest a culminating event or an apex of the narrative. But you talked about absences and the importance of those. And it seems that the apex of the narrative is never revealed. How is that important to the way your work works?
That's a really good question. Well, I think as an artist working in this way, we were kind of talking about this earlier, but the challenge is to find that sweet spot so that you're offering enough information so that the viewer isn't just totally bewildered, but yet you're holding enough back so that they can arrive at their own aha moments or even their own interpretations based on their own life experiences or connotations or associations. So I try to find that balance, and I feel like rather than like explicitly dramatizing the climax, in some cases, I just feel like the human mind is so much more powerful in filling in that absence. That is my hope.
Holly, you probably don't know, but we asked Matt Hammond to give a talk, so we wanted to invite all of you back on June 25th for a Saturday Plus with Matt, who's giving a talk about Holly's work called Holly Andres, Encoding the Narrative Arc. So you can see his leading question is finding out more information, thinking about constructing his talk. So all that information is in our new newsletter, so I hope you grab one before we head out. So I just wanted to interrupt the questions. Please carry on. Thank you.
Well, John actually told me, and I noticed in the dates of your series, you went for a couple of years without making your own stories, your own art, and you were doing more commercial work.
Yeah, precisely.
Can you talk about the connection between those two? Has the commercial work helped inform your current work, or has it made you want to make more of your own work, or has it distracted from it?
All of those things.
All those things.
Yeah. So let's see when that would have been. 2012. Made a real significant life transition out of academia. To be completely candid, I got overlooked for a tenure track position that that I applied for, and so did 300 other people, and I was the second choice. And so at that moment, I thought, well, I can move to the Midwest, or maybe I could reinvent my career. Some people have said that the way that I photograph might have some editorial or commercial application. So I had a show in New York, January of 2011, and I had assembled kind of an industry standard portfolio, and I hit the pavement, and I pedaled my butt around New York City, and I made all sorts of appointments with various photo editors and art directors, and so the work that I showed, had a pretty expansive collection of fine art, and so fortunately, the work that I've been hired to do for editorial or commercial work has been influenced by my fine art, which has been a privileged spot to be in as a commercial photographer. So in the last 4 years or so, because now I'm my own boss, and there's not a lot of certainty. I feel like I've exerted so much energy just trying to maintain connections and a rapport and really trying not to say no to anything. But fortunately and unfortunately, that means that I haven't had much time or energy left over to make fine art. But at the same time, to be just completely pragmatic, I feel like part of my cachet as a commercial and editorial photographer is the fact that I am a fine artist, and that, you know, I'm represented by various prominent galleries, and I want to continue to exhibit with them. And so I've been really struggling for about 4 years, just thinking that the timing was going to be right, or the ideas were going to come to me. And, you know, of course, like a lot of artists, I keep a notebook of ideas that I return to at times like that. But it really wasn't until I discovered that estate sale at that house, and I learned that I became so inspired I wanted to photograph there. And so let me see here. Honestly, I have found, I'm just so grateful that I get to make photographs for a living. And I have found that the editorial and the commercial work has, continues to keep me stimulated creatively, and because the clients that I work for are, you know, like the New York Times Magazine and Time Magazine, and I feel like the subjects are very compelling. I get to travel all over the country. In fact, I have my first cover story with the New York Times Magazine that comes out May 8th. So I've been working on that the last month. And in the last month and a half, I've been to Seattle, and then home, and West Virginia, and then home, and New York, and then home, and then San Francisco, and home, and Tucson, and home. So, you know, that's stimulating, and, you know, I have to think, trust my intuition and make difficult decisions really quickly. So I feel like while I may not be making art with a capital A, I feel as though I'm still flexing that creative muscle in my mind pretty rigorously. Elizabeth.
I have a question about your editing process, and in the creation of these serial narratives, what things are left out and how do you make those choices?
Well, that is, that's a really good question. Honestly, I storyboard a lot of these points, these kind of plot points within the story, that I want to try to capture an essence of that moment in the narrative. And so I'm not shooting a ton of images that are edited out. But for example, this this nighttime play activity of dressing up in this mystery woman's clothes, from that point of view, I did, you know, try a bunch of different variations. And I think that while I'm editing, it's almost, there's this feeling, I guess Roland Barthes would call it the punction, where pierces your heart with feeling, where there's just there's like a just impact, and it doesn't happen with all of my photographs, but I think that well, for example, the photograph of the two girls where she's helping her button the blue dress, that lovely girl has this kind of peculiar tendency where her eyes simultaneously will focus on two different things at the same time. And you can't see it in reality, but I caught it twice on film. And when I saw it on my computer, it seemed it just felt so different. It made me think that she was simultaneously thinking about two different things and these two parallel stories. So increasingly, I would like to get to a place where I have I have control, where I'm trying to work in a choreographed and controlled manner, where I'm paying attention to the art direction, the lighting, an implied narrative, but rather I'm waiting for these moments of ungoverned serendipity. And I think this is a pretty good example where I took a million shots directing her to be kind of sitting up against the wall, feeling kind of scared and guilty because she, was the one who was disturbing the hornet's nest, but she was unscathed. And then there was this moment that I didn't realize it at the time, but I looked at it in the editing process where she's actually trying to be me. She's, taking a photo of me with her hands as the camera. And I just feel like there's a different feeling there. So my hope as I continue to grow as an artist is to find that counterbalance between this structure with this kind of unpredictable, natural moments of uncertainty. Does that answer your question? Thanks. Yeah.
To me, it looks like your palette is well chosen. Do you do that unconsciously or very consciously? Or anywhere in between?
Yeah, I do that very consciously.
Okay.
And and sometimes I'm not above changing colors in Photoshop. I do that sometimes as well. Yeah.
Might you be able to share with us what your project is this weekend?
Well, yes, I'm a little superstitious about sharing projects I haven't photographed yet, but I will tell you, I am going to be photographing real adolescent huntresses, deer hunters. So I'm very excited about that. Yeah.
Did the lady die in the thing?
I don't know. I don't know. I hope not. I don't know.
Does it look like she was smoking or she was on drugs?
Yeah. Well, that's a very astute observation.
Well, we should thank
Thank you
Alex
so much.
Thank you so much.